It's week 4, day 23 of my full-time spinal rehabilitation. A status update here. I'm seeing my cardio capacity increase pretty dramatically. Today I swam 20 laps in 39 minutes. 7 of those were breaststroke, and the remaining 13 were freestyle. And of the freestyle, I was able to swim 4 laps consecutively, twice actually, which is way better than I was doing on day one. Day one, I swam 1 lap consecutively. So to feel my lung capacity increase and my ability to deliver oxygen increase throughout my body is pretty exhilarating. I'm really excited about that. It's definitely a milestone for me. I'm starting to notice a decent amount of weightlifting capacity develop as well. The weights I started out with originally were pretty light, and now they're coming up to a level that I feel is pretty reasonable or normal. So on those two fronts, I'm seeing great progress, and I'm really excited about it. My wife made an offhand comment to me about being surprised that I wasn't incapacitated at this point. And I'm actually a little surprised too that I'm doing as well as I'm doing. I do feel some strain in my mid to lower back. It almost feels like it's on the verge of going ballistic, but it doesn't do it, which is kind of strange. And so I sat back and tried to figure out why is that? And I think I have a pretty good explanation. I have some really elaborate recovery procedures that I go through. Case in point, you'll notice these purple ice packs on my shoulders. Well, there are 2 ice packs on my back at the same time. So when I get home, I go through a pretty intense cool down routine. This is just an example of something I do. But what's different this time in my rehabilitation is I have a very elaborate warm up routine, cool down routine, and recovery routines. I actually go to a recovery center. And when I get home, I still do more icing. So there's a lot going on there, and I think that's keeping the back demon at bay. So it's definitely aggravated and strained, almost to the point where it wants to spasm, but it doesn't. And so I count myself lucky that I found some good warm up, cool down, and recovery routines that are keeping everything okay, well enough that I can keep functioning, well enough that I can keep pushing myself. I've also learned that you can push too much, but you can also push too little. I think before I was stuck in physical therapy land. I wasn't willing to move beyond that and actually really start challenging my body in the way that it needed to be challenged. And now that I have a personal trainer, I feel like I'm bridging that gap and finding that the rest of my body being in better shape or being willing to pick up the load is helping to reduce the load on my spine. So those are the 2 tips, basically, the elaborate warm-up, cool-down recovery techniques, and then being willing to push enough to get the rest of your body to stand up and take some of the load that normally my spine would bear. Those 2 things have made a big difference this go-round, and I hope that continues to be the case. That's my status update. For tips today, I'm going to continue down that protein train of thought. In addition to eating some nuts and some dried fruit after my workout to get some protein into my body, I am using a protein powder. The brand that I like is KOS or KOS or KOS. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. It's plant-based, and I have 1 shake a day. From that shake, I get about 15 grams of protein. And then from my oatmeal in the morning, I also add some protein powder to it. I get another 10 grams, and then I'm also getting the protein from my nuts. I eat a lot of rice and quinoa, which are pretty heavy in protein as well. I'm probably not getting 80 grams of protein a day, which is what I really probably should get, but I'm definitely getting a lot more than before. And I've noticed a huge difference in my recovery times by taking and supplementing with protein. So this is also part of that elaborate recovery routine that I was talking about. I'm using protein now, and I can tell that my body's coming back faster, which is very exciting to me. The other tip I have is it's important to make micro refinements all the way along through your rehab process. So I've been doing this pretty continuously. And I have a silly example, but it's one that I just made today, which is I put my nose plug on before I leave the men's locker room and go to the pool. And the reason I do this is because once your nose is wet, it's very hard to put a nose plug on and have it stay, or you have to go dry your nose, or in my case, I made it all the way down to the pool and then my nose plug broke. And then I had to walk all the way back to the locker room, put on another one. So I decided, you know what? I'm just going to put that thing on before I ever walk out of the locker room. That way I know I've got one. It's going to stay in place. My nose isn't going to get wet and cause it to slip off, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a silly example, but it's just an example of micro refinements you can make along the way to make your workout more efficient and better and facilitate just optimal rehabilitation. That's the tips for today. Today, I'd like to talk about a topic, anxiety, specifically how to combat it. And I don't mind talking about this in a very personal way because I've struggled with anxiety myself. I've been watching some inspirational videos on YouTube by Tony Robbins, and he's so put together and so influential, and he's basically arrived at the pinnacle of success. It's very difficult for me to relate to him as a human being because I don't know how to get from where I am to where he is exactly. I want to move in that direction, but I don't know how to pull it off. And I suspect that other people that see videos like that from people who are really well put together and already have it all all figured out, how do I relate to this person? And I don't know if I can. So I have a suspicion that people might do a little bit better with someone who is essentially saying similar things, pointing you in the same direction, but is actually going through that process right now and struggling with it, which is me. I'm that guy. So I'm your lesser Tony Robbins, so to speak. And I'm okay with sharing my past, specifically even some of my present struggles, because I know that that's my past and my present, but not my future. I know what my future is going to look like now. I can see it. And so it doesn't bother me that much. It bothers me a little to share personal details about things that I'm struggling with or have struggled with, just because I think they can help other people. And at some point, again, it's just going to be the past. And I don't care if people know that I struggled with anxiety at one point, or that I had to go through rehabilitation to deal with chronic pain and take, psychedelics to alleviate depressive symptoms. So what? It's what I had to do, and I did it, which again shows character. It shows a willingness to struggle and to fight, which I think anybody can appreciate. Whatever that fight is, as long as you're willing to fight it, I think you're the kind of person that a person would want to employ or be friends with, or whatever the case may be. I don't think people are going to hold this against me. I may live to regret that statement, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So to give you a little bit of my history with anxiety, I've had low-grade anxiety for years, but it became kind of acute in the last year or so. I'm not quite sure what precipitated the change exactly, but it definitely increased in the last year. A usual symptom for me is my heart rate becomes very elevated, kind of like I'm mildly exercising, like around 110 beats per minute. And so now that I have my Fitbit, I can kind of tell what's going on with my heart rate. And if I sense that I'm having one of these, I can do things to mitigate it, like meditate, for example, or just take a break and kind of recompose myself. Another symptom is I tend to sweat my shirts out. So I know that something's wrong if I'm perspiring for no good reason. It's not like I'm lifting weights and perspiring. I'm just perspiring for no reason whatsoever, apparently. Those are the symptoms that I experience with anxiety. And anxiety attacks would kind of come on almost daily, really, in different contexts. And so it was becoming a real problem for me. And it still is to a degree, but it's less right now. I have an example of a practical thing that happened today. It didn't induce an anxiety attack like I'm describing. And those aren't really attacks. They're just elevated, nervousness levels that aren't good, that impede your ability to function. And the example today happened around swimming. So before I get in the pool, I always go and sit in the not the dry sauna, I'm confusing two things, the hot tub, to warm my body up fully. So I'm in there at least 8 minutes to get my body warmed up, and then I go get in the pool and I swim. Well, there are 2 dedicated swim lanes at my gym, and usually one of them's occupied. So when I go to get in the hot tub, the first thing in my brain is, well, if I get in the hot tub, somebody might take my swim lane. And this thought kind of preoccupies my thinking for a while, even when I'm in the hot tub. And sometimes I'm tempted to get out of the hot tub too soon. So I'll cut it down to 6 minutes. I'm like, no. You need to stay in there 8 minutes, or maybe 8 to 10 minutes, fully warm up, and then go get in and get your swim lane if it's still there. So the way I overcome this is using a strategy I call then what. And it's basically, let your fear play out. And what would you do if it did, right? So let's say somebody does take my swim lane while I'm sitting in the hot tub, and I get up and there's nowhere for me to swim. Well, that's not entirely true. There are non-swim lanes that aren't necessarily dedicated, but they're usually not occupied. I could use one of those. There's a secondary pool that doesn't have any swim lanes, and of course the distance is shorter because it's not really a lap pool. But I could swim there, worst case scenario, right? And that's not even the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is all those options are exhausted and I have to wait. Well, so what if I have to wait? And if I have to wait too long, I could always just switch and go get on the bike. So worst case scenario is I can't swim that day. I have to go do something else. And so as I go through this little mental process, I realize, you know what, it's not worth fretting about. And I get into the hot tub and I listen to the bubbles and I try to meditate. And when I notice my thoughts gravitating back towards the swim lane, I just nudge myself back towards the bubbles. And I don't look at my watch. I don't watch the timer or the clock. And I just wait for the timer. Well, there's a timer on my Fitbit. And it goes off about the 8-minute mark. And when it goes off, then I get out and then I go get my swim lane. And today it was actually available. And interestingly enough, once I got into my lane, the other guy got out of his. And I had the entire pool area to myself, which was just one of those fortuitous things. It felt like I had my own private pool, basically. And it was actually an entire pool area. There was just nobody there. And so I was just alone swimming in the lap pool all by myself, and it was idyllic. I loved it. So that's my tip on how to combat anxiety. And you can practice this. It's actually a really good idea to practice it on something really simple and stupid. I suspect, like I was doing, right? Oh no, my swim lane might get taken. Granted, this didn't induce a panic attack, but it is kind of a precursor or a smaller micro example of something that could induce an anxiety attack. And if you can learn to cope with that, in theory, you can learn to cope with something that's a little bit more difficult to deal with. And so my slogan, again, is to fight for your life. And fighting often means fighting little fights every day or every hour. And if you win enough of those, then you will win the bigger fights and you'll actually get your life back. So don't discount those little micro fights or even little silly fights going on every day, those little things that you're doing to improve your situation, because those can compound and they can turn into something significant. And that's what I'm hoping will happen in my case. And at some point in the future, I'll look back on these examples of me being stressed about the lap pool and just laugh about it and go, yeah, that was pretty silly, but now I'm over it. That's the hope anyway. If you have any ideas about how to overcome anxiety or strategies that you use, please share them in the comment section. And do not forget to subscribe.